Hi folks, welcome to day 4. We are going to be learning about how to factor by grouping today. So throughout this week we've reviewed our addition, subtraction, and multiplication of polynomials, as well as some of those characteristics like leading coefficient, like this thing here, degree, that thing there. Right, we've learned about some of those things throughout this week. We also learned yesterday how to factor out monomials, meaning one term with x, as well as we learned about some different formulas that exist that can help us to factor. Today we're going to be learning about a new type of, or not new, but a different type of factoring called factor by grouping. Now, factor by grouping only works when you have 4 terms. All right, so this only works because my example here has 4 terms. Now, I'm going to let you know, my example that I have up here, ax to the 4th plus bx cubed plus cx squared plus dx, while that's a common form, that's certainly not the only form that you can factor. However, it has to have 4 terms in order to use factor by grouping. If you don't have 4 terms, you cannot use factor by grouping in order to factor it. All right, so there are 4 steps in every factor by grouping problem. Your first step is always get it into standard form. All right, that's always your first step because if you don't do that first, you can't get the right answer. Once you're in standard form, you're going to create groups by putting parentheses around your first 2 terms and your last 2 terms. Now, it's really important here that I'm going to point out, in this case that we have up here, right, if we look up here, we have a positive, a plus sign there, and a plus sign here. So that's why I could put a plus sign down here in my example. But if this was a negative sign, you'd have to change the signs of the other things inside of our second set of parentheses. If you are curious about that or confused about that, I do an example in the written notes. All right. To keep my video short, I'm only going to go through one example, so I'm going to go through a base case in this case. All right. But make sure that if that's a minus sign, you're changing the signs of everything else in the second set of parentheses. So that's step 2. Step 3 is you're going to factor out of each of your set of parentheses, you're going to factor out your greatest common factor, which is almost always your leading coefficient and your smallest x, right? Your smallest power of x. Those are almost always your greatest common factor. And your final step is you're going to be identifying the factors. And this will make a lot more sense when we actually do an example. So I'm going to go ahead and move into that now. So in this example, I have 3x to the 4th minus 9x cubed plus 2x squared minus 6x. Now, in this case, I wrote this that way I wouldn't have to worry about going in and writing this in standard form. I just always have it written in standard form. That's just how I like to start. All right. If you have a problem that's not in standard form, meaning the biggest power of x isn't first, make sure you write it in standard form. After we have that, though, then we can go ahead. So step 1, have it in standard form. Check. Step 2, put parentheses around your first 2 and your last 2. Check. We made our groups. Step 3, remember, is factoring out your greatest common factor. So that's going to be, for my first set of parentheses, my greatest common factor is going to be a 3 because that's my leading coefficient. My smallest power of x is an x cubed. So then I'm left with a 3x cubed on the outside. And remember, this is just like dividing each of these terms by 3x cubed. So we have 3x to the 4th divided by 3x cubed. 3 divided by 3 is 1. X to the 4th divided by x cubed is x. Then we have negative 9 divided by 3 gets us negative 3. Then we have x cubed divided by x cubed, which is just 1. So now we have our left term factored, but we still have our entire right term. All right. So we have a 2x squared minus 6x. So again, we're going to factor out that leading coefficient in our smallest power of x. Leading coefficient is 2. Smallest power of x is just x. Then we'll divide each term by our factor. So we're going to divide each term by 2x in our left parenthesis set, or sorry, our right parenthesis set. So 2x squared divided by 2x is 2 divided by 2 is 1. X squared divided by x is just x. Then we have 6 divided by 2, which gets us a 3, and x divided by x, which is just 1. Now you should be able to really easily see that we now have a new polynomial that has 2 x cubes in it. Or sorry, not x cubes. 2 x minus 3's in it. So this, remember, this is a whole polynomial, which means we can go ahead and factor out the x minus 3 from each term. So if I pull that out front, then we have x minus 3. That's like going through and dividing each term by x minus 3. So I have 3x cubed times x minus 3 divided by x minus 3. So my x minus 3 on top cancels my x minus 3 on bottom. I'm left with just my 3x cubed. Then I have plus, so I have plus 2x times x minus 3 divided by x minus 3. X minus 3 on top cancels the x minus 3 on bottom, so I'm left with just 2x. So then we have x minus 3 times 3x cubed plus 2x. Remember this in the green, the division by x minus 3 was just me helping you visualize this factoring piece. You don't have to do that in your own notes and your own problems if that's too confusing. But I wanted to at least show you that that's how you pull out that x minus 3. Now, these two pieces here, our x minus 3 and our x minus 3, those will always, always, always be the same. If they're not the same, you did something wrong, or the problem can't be factored. All right, so make sure that those are always the same, so that way we can pull out that x minus 3. I know that this has been going on for a while, but we're not done yet. All right, the final step is to make sure that all of our factors are listed and make sure that they're easily identified. It should be factored fully, right? So that's our fourth step. We identified one of our factors, and that can't be simplified, so that's excellent. X minus 3 is great. But over here, we have 3x cubed plus 2x. Now, 3 and 2 don't have a greatest common factor, but x cubed and x do. We can pull out an x from each of these terms. So we could have x minus 3 times x, because we're pulling out an x from each of those terms, so dividing both sides by x, all right, or dividing both terms by x. We have 3x cubed divided by x gets us a 3x squared. Then we have 2x divided by x gets us 2. So, all in all, our three factors are x minus 3, x, and 3x squared plus 2. Those are our three factors, and you can always go through and FOIL those out if you're like, I'm not really sure. I think I might be wrong. You can always check your answer by refoiling things out. My strong recommendation today is go through, read through my paper notes, as well as check out my extra video resources I post, because factoring by grouping is tough, all right? Best of luck on the assignment. Let me know if you have any questions. Shoot me an email or anything.